Buddhist teachings will change the outlook people have on understanding the variety of sexual orientations. In this compilation of multiple sources to confirm this thesis, these articles will give you an understanding of Buddhist beliefs once against and now for sexual diversity, the practices in which many went by to eliminate sexual acts and identities, as well as the ethical debate. A few articles from the discussion post, one being Homosexuality as Seen in Indian Buddhist Texts by Leonard Willing. The idea of sexual ethics for lay people is one that was little addressed by Indian Buddhist thinkers. Buddhist texts in this one specifically consist of a negative stance toward ill expressions of sexuality as being against the spiritual process. However, what surprised me out of this article is that the vast majority of the followers were not expected to be sexually abstinent, in that adultery and other forms of sexual misconduct is still against all religious beings and is widely unacceptable. Buddhists see sexual misconduct in terms of sexual relationships with various types of prohibited women in the performance of non-procreative sexual acts. In this article, it explains that they have taken extreme measures to lay down the monastic law that is to minimize homosexual activity, such as two nuns not being able to share the same bed cover. However, to explain homosexuality, they use labeling as a sort of shaming for these individuals, such as, and I apologize for the butchering, Nimantaritia without sexual organs, and Pandaka without testicles. These labels gave light or direct explanations for people to understand why others were attracted to the same sex. However, this soon became offensive labeling in years to come. With this being said, Indian Buddhism cannot be seen as a sex-positive religion due to that homosexual behavior is degrading such as or just as much as heterosexual behaviors. To further explain, it is frowned upon for sex outside of procreation amongst man and wife, but is also frowned upon for a man to find love and comfort in another male. This article was very conflicting, as it is explaining all forms of sexual activity and orientation can be frowned upon, almost as if their whole duty is to their religious beliefs and none to their own being. The second slide is what you can follow up looking over this article. Slide 3, Sex by Janet Gaiastro. In this article, it was a little challenging for me to read. The overall understanding behind this article was how monks came to find the idea of sex being as equally punishable as stealing and murder. All men and women are subject to temptation, and through women of promiscuity, this is how monks fell short of their religious obligations. It was that sexual practice is what started this ongoing problem in Buddhism. Buddhist ethics do recognize that lay men and women will have sex, which is not necessarily forbidden, but it is an area of suspicion. There are a few guidelines in which the practice of sex must follow. 1. Sex should be limited to married partners. 2. It should not be performed on religious holidays or in the vicinity of sacred shrines. And 3. A few sources of several kinds of sexual pleasures, such as oral, anal, and sexual intercourse. It also implies that bodily reactions on its own has no penalty, as well as mental activity on its own does not either. What sex in pure transgression does understand is that sexuality provides the body's greatest temptation, its greatest pleasure, and sex is also the impulse of the body finds most painful to resist. Meaning that sex is a normal part of individuals' genetic makeup. Sex is what has brought each one of us here today, and sex is what makes everyone unique, and that one love is not the same as the next. The following slide, Sex and the Single Monk by John Powers. On the portion titled, What's Wrong with a Little Sex, I decided to better understand what is wrong with the Buddhist ideas of sex. It was stated that conventional wisdom holds that sexual intercourse is beneficial to physical and mental health if it is done in moderation, but the literature of static movement in India presents a very different assessment. Being that my focus was on sexual orientation, I feel that sex itself is a very important factor into what makes up sexual orientation. Therefore, a classical Indian medical theory signifies this in particular. This theory states that if men take part in excessive mental excitement during sexual intercourse, his semen will soon diminish and he will become emaciated. He will succumb to various diseases and even death. Therefore, a man who wishes to have good health should definitely preserve his semen. This essentially means that men who are able to stray and resist sex are able to live longer lives than those who participate in sexual activity more frequently than not. Man is what was originally tempted in these stories of how man came to understand temptation. So from my understanding is that sex is seen as a forbidden act, being of the negative stigma it has behind, and it is not being lawful and is also impure. Now, the next article is one that I found on my own research, which is entitled Sacred Discourse, Exploring Gender, Sexuality, and Spirituality in Buddhism, Chapter 32, by Rita M. Goss. In this article of the book, it discusses closely the understanding of the ways of the Buddhism faith and how it sees sexual orientation. Specifically, the Buddhist values were very controversial, unflattering term to be found. In this chapter of the book, it discusses closely the understanding of the ways of the Buddhism faith and how it sees sexual orientation. Specifically, the Buddhist values were very controversial. The willingness of family life and reproduction in the favor of monasticism was unfilial, the most unflattering term to be found in cultural context. Its meaning was that of disloyalty in everything decent and valuable. Although many Buddhist texts expressed a great deal of disgust for the body in the aversion to sexuality, specifically to women's sexuality, was stating that it is a result of sexuality and not of sexuality itself that are thought to be dangerous for monasticism views. It was believed that sexual activity usually results in two things: 1, attachment, and 2, offspring. However, many Buddhists express their freedom of them in the monasticism lifestyle. This stems to children and adolescent aspects of sexual orientation, specifically preteens and teenagers. They are living in the remarkably single-sex world. This is being that the original views marked homosexuality as forbidden and something to be shameful and unnatural. Following the next slide, being different in dignity, Buddhist inclusiveness of homosexuality. In this scholarly article, it focused on the more upcoming views of Buddhism. It stated that despite the fact that Buddhism is a relatively open-minded toward homosexuality, some Buddhist monks and nuns continue to find it difficult to work with homosexual Buddhist followers. Bhante Dhammika, a Buddhist monk, stated that homosexuals are as capable of wanting and of feeling love and affection towards their partners as heterosexuals are, and as such states, our present homosexual sex is as capable as heterosexual sex. With this statement, there has been a direct correlation between acceptance by others, psychological well-being, and quality of life. Buddhists exhibit much more understanding and acceptance towards LGBTQ, as previously stated and demonstrated through their attributes of love, kindness, and compassion towards all groups of sexual orientations. As Buddhism takes pride in its ideals of love and acceptance, it is being said that love only happens when we see others as equals with understanding and acceptance. A quote that really stuck out to me was from a Buddhist nun. In the light of Buddhist equality, homosexuality is no better or no worse than heterosexuality, because neither same-sex or opposite-sex relationships are distinguishable, as long as the relationship is sincere, faithful, and mutual of caring. Homosexual individuals are able, 'able' 'and 'are' 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 'able' 'and That is, they are capable of the message, and thus Buddhism can embrace this discriminated group. Stated by Banikini Danina. To me, this is the evolving idea of love and acceptance that the Buddhist faith was built up upon. And as political figures evolve to these new ideas, we are now able to grow in the Buddhism faith. Next slide. The rise of rainbow Dharma. Buddhism on sexual diversity and same-sex marriage. It was in 2004 when a Buddhist king called for the legalization of same-sex marriage in his country. They emphasized that Buddhism has never prohibited same-sex marriage, that is normal for the people to have sex, and that sex in Buddhism is not only in function of procreation. This being that it does not matter to Buddhism whether sex is same-sex or not. With the king imposing his ideas, this led to even Buddhists who were convinced that being gay was immoral. It was made clear that there is no license of discrimination works in this case. This being the king imposing his ideas, which led to even Buddha who are now being seen that gay is not a breach in moral code and is not one who can no longer be a Buddhist. However, then, Buddhists should explicitly support same-sex marriage. Due to Buddhism being a very worldwide known religion, it is that these new findings and understandings of sexual orientation are accepted due to Buddhism's beliefs and in their code in which they stand for. A primary motivation for Buddhism is to support and accept sexual diversity, was and still is the Buddhist belief on compassion to all individuals. Thank you.